Welcome back. Our next lecturer is Steve Gates. He's the founder and CEO of the GAP Partnership. He has built this organization over the past 20 years to become the world's leading negotiation consultancy, working with over 500 organizations globally. His understanding of negotiation process, strategy, tactics, behavior, and psychology has enabled his team to shape and mold the most effective negotiation solutions in the world. Steve Gates is the author of The Negotiation Book and has written numerous articles on the subject of negotiation. Today, he's here to discuss why time is the single biggest influence in any negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Good morning and welcome to, it says here, time the single biggest influence in any negotiation, which is quite a bold statement, given the breadth and complexity of the subject of negotiation. As Maria said, my name is Steve Gates. I'm CEO of the GAP Partnership. We're a global negotiation consultancy. We provide services to about 600 global organizations in 60 countries, in 12 languages, and I have a team of 200 around the world who support, coach, mentor, train, facilitate, and consult with large organizations. When I say large organizations, that's a combination of anything from baked beans and Coca-Cola through to oil lines and banks and M&A. It is very, very diverse. It's across every single business sector. So what I'm going to talk about today is from a practitioner's perspective, from what I see, what I hear, what I understand, what I experience on a day-by-day basis around the world from the consulting projects that we are engaged in. So what you won't hear me saying is, or due to my latest piece of research or something that goes back 5 or 6 years, my research is from the last 6 months of what is actually going on in the world today, around the world, and those dynamics which we can draw learnings from, understand about, and use to decode, to simplify, to help everyone understand more about what can be easily perceived as a complex subject matter. So the last 20 years I've run this business. It is my life. I have an absolute passion for the psychology of negotiation, the processes, the strategies, the behaviors, the tactics, which are deployed in different stages, different ways, in different arenas of negotiation. And what I've chosen to do today is take one small snapshot called time to examine what this does to human beings, to processes, to negotiation outcomes, to understand what is it that time does that influences or steers the way in which negotiations unfold. I'm taking this single lens, this lens to look at negotiation at one thing, time. Because in an hour and 20 minutes that I have, you can't possibly start to cover off such a broad, complex subject matter. So I thought, take something, break it down, simplify it. Because time is the one common language that we have around the world. A second, a minute, an hour, a day is universal. It means the same thing to everyone. Or does it? And that's one of the areas that we're going to consider today. So, let's take a look at what I'm trying to cover here. Time and circumstance dynamics. What does time do to the circumstances, the balance of power, and the challenges that we have during the negotiations as they unfold? The second area that I'll cover off today is time as a value. You see, the way in which we engineer value during the negotiations that we're involved in, each of the variables, the issues, the opportunities that you may discuss, have an associated dynamic, an associated dimension, and that is of time. When you link time to a variable, it changes the value of that variable inside the heads of both parties to a different degree. So time, in fact, affects the value, the total value opportunity which exists within the deal which is agreed, the deal which is developed by both parties. And I'll talk more to that during the course of this morning. And the third area is proactivity. Because, of course, time can be controlled, can be shaped, can be steered. You can use time to your advantage, the pressure points of time, to bring deals to a close, or to employ power as part of the implications and consequences if one party are not to agree by a certain point in time. The opportunity to deploy proactivity by building strategies and executing those strategies gives you more power than you think you have. And the way to do that, as I'll describe a little bit later, is through the art of sequencing events through time that gives you more power than you would have otherwise have had if you were in a reactive stance during the course of that negotiation. So these three simple areas are the three areas that I'm going to focus on over the course of the next hour or so, and help us to examine what time really means. So let's take a look at this first one. About 6 months ago, I was on my way to a rugby match. Rugby in the UK is pretty popular, as it is in Australia, South Africa, and other places. And I'm walking towards Twickenham for the England versus Scotland game, and they were selling scarves. Simple scarves that you buy on your way to a rugby match, and it was an England-Scotland scarf, and it was for sale for £15, so about $20 US for a scarf. You could buy it before you go into the stadium and wear your scarf with pride. Well, about an hour and a half later, when I was leaving that stadium, the same scarf was for sale. But of course, an hour and a half had shifted, and what had happened to the value of those self-same scarves? Well, they were now being sold for £5. So we'd gone from £15 to £5 in an hour and a half. And I sat there looking, I took my phone out and took a picture of this store, scratching my head, thinking, my God, how powerful. 1.5 hours and a devaluation to the tune of 200% on the value of this scarf. This thing called time has an immense impact on the value of things. The perception or the perceived or what somebody values an item to have can change dramatically over a very short period of time. And it was that moment in time when I thought, you know what, I need to examine this. There's more to this than meets the eye. And 6 months ago, my little journey, which last week I just signed a second book contract to write a book on negotiation and time to make it even more interesting for me, coming out of my perception of what time does to value and understanding how do we deploy time, how do we utilize time. Now, also, what if you could move time backwards by a minute or two? Just stop there. I just want to reverse by 2 minutes and start again. And you'll all remember the Oscars only a few months ago, when we're presented with one of the more, if you like, embarrassing moments on TV, when, of course, the La La Land was announced as being the Oscar winner, and in fact it wasn't. And PwC, the brand, the individuals are all placed on the spot. Now, what might they have paid at that moment to rewind the clock by simply 2 minutes and start again? Of course, we can't. Time is finite. Time continues to move forward. You know, there will always be a tomorrow. It is coming. So therefore, how do we use the fact that tomorrow is coming in negotiation to create power, create momentum, and actually to employ it as a vehicle for building, creating, distributing, whatever context you're in, value? So I started thinking, okay, well, we can't move time backwards, but there are many people out there who wish we could, if only I had a second bite of the cherry, if only I had a second go of exploiting a particular opportunity. Of course, time means different things to different people. The clock may say 12 o'clock, but in fact, what 12 o'clock means to one party may be quite different to another party. You see, we are faced with dilemmas, pressures, objectives, opportunities, motives. We are remunerated, rewarded for certain performance levels during our negotiation. We'll be conscious of deadlines, what the month end might mean to a particular individual, why they are motivated to perform in a particular way, how their targets are measured, how they are perceived during the context of job roles. This is an individual. In other words, most individuals go into a negotiation with certain baggage, certain implications, certain motivations to get a deal done within a certain time frame. It's quite rare for it to be just totally open-ended without consequence. So the individual carries this pressure, this understanding, this consequence in their mind. They're in this negotiation and they have a desire to work it through. If they are particularly proactive, they will have a strategy, a plan, an understanding, a realistic view of how long this negotiation may take. And of course, their lines of inquiry in the first instance will be to qualify with the other parties what is likely to be realistic, but nonetheless working towards that. And all of the time, the clock is ticking away. Now, meanwhile, of course, on the other side of the table will be a second person. Maybe a third person, maybe a team, maybe a second, third, fourth party involved, for whom the same point in time will have different consequences, different challenges. In other words, the pressures that one party brings, as most of you may know as negotiators, it is often inappropriate to explain or declare what time pressures you're working to. You're simply giving away power. But more likely than not, the consequences of a particular timeline will mean one thing to one party and a different thing to the other party. And understanding those implications to the extent to which we can, through inquiry, through questioning, through exploring, through research, just understand what are the dilemmas that the other party may face, is a critical component of the exploration, the research and the preparation that any negotiator needs to do. What does time mean to you? Absolutely fundamental. And without that understanding, it can be used against you in the same way. So really important to understand the implications of time. See, this thing's ticking around here, ticking away, and the tensions, the tactics which come into play, denied access, delaying tactics, escalation tactics, can often be simply about burning another day, burning another week. Let's make them sweat on it, leave them to sweat on a particular dilemma, consequence, proposal, summary that we've left them with, and we'll sow the seeds nice and early and let them address the emotional reaction of what we've given them to, because in an hour's time or in a day's time or in a week's time, they will feel differently about it. You see, we all have a psychological relationship with time. It will do things to you. It will burn away at you, or it will allow you to get the emotional reaction of a position which is unacceptable out of your system and start to think how or where or under what circumstance could we work with the proposal that has landed. If you expect someone to react immediately to a proposal that's landed, then the likelihood is you're simply going to get a rejection and 10 different reasons as to why that's unacceptable, and we're going to need to start again. So one of the ways in which time is employed as a means of sowing seeds early, giving them things to think about, and then we'll come away, go away and think about it, we'll talk about it at a later date. And that is providing that time for them to get their ideas, their thinking around what you've tabled, and an opportunity for you to engage in some constructive dialogue. An average of 4.5 seconds. That's not very long. I conducted some research on my own just recently with a top 4 audit company in the world, across the world. And they have senior partners who are responsible for closing major agreements with corporations to serve them. And a dilemma was placed to a whole range of about 30 senior partners in this top audit company. The dilemma was, you've got a deal on the table and it's worth $10 million for an annual contract to service a particular client. And the client comes back to you as part of concluding the negotiation and congratulates you on, you are our preferred supplier. We want to work with you. We want to take it forward for another 3 years. But in this given year, the next year, the price you put on the table is simply unacceptable. But we do want to work with you, and I believe if you can do the deal for $9 million, I can get sign-off for you this afternoon. And the question was, how long did it take the average senior partner to agree to $9 million? And the answer was 4.5 seconds. Now, why? There's $1 million concession there and then. You've got the agreement. It's in the bag. We'll sign it off today. And the reason was because they could. They were empowered to do so. They understood the margins that they were operating on at 50%, and therefore $1 million off was doable. It's in the bag. I can go back and celebrate. I can make my excuses. It's the only way the deal would have got done. But 4.5 seconds, what sort of emotional situation would that senior partner, a person with a tremendous level of commercial acumen, who probably has been in post for many, many years to acquire that role, would be prepared? On average, some were quicker. I'll take it. Some at 1 second. Some maybe took 15 seconds but on average 4.5 seconds. And tick, 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 just burned away, and the carrot and the opportunity and the risk of not agreeing, all psychologically burned away at that individual to say, I'll take it, at 4.5 seconds, $1 million off, in the bag, done. You see, time does things also to nerve. And one of the primary characteristics of any strong negotiator is the ability to exercise nerve, to see things for what they are, to be sufficiently self-aware that even when the pressure is on and the clock is ticking, that you do that which is appropriate to your circumstance. And what is appropriate to your circumstance can vary and can range. Subject to how empowered you are, subject to what options you've got, subject to a whole range of other considerations. But the ability to exercise nerve in negotiation is certainly one of the things at the Gap Partnership that we continuously train individuals to exercise. Because if you are not sufficiently self-aware of your own emotional makeup, your own ability to think clearly when you are faced with a breadth of different situations, then you will become compromised. You become a victim to your own emotions. And it's time and pressure and consequence that is doing that. The relationship between time and consequence is fundamental in negotiation. If you understand that those two relationships, you have a lot to work with. Okay, let's move on. Some time ago, about 20 years ago, I built this clock face. And this clock face came out of a frustration that I had to determine what was the most appropriate way to negotiate any agreement. And concluded over about a 12-month period that there is no appropriate way to negotiate a deal. There are many, many different ways to negotiate an agreement. And there'll be a range of different circumstances that will essentially inform you of the path that you may choose to take. So, subject to you having enough power to exercise that. It's all very well saying, well, we're going to be up at the win-win here. That's where we like being at win-win, total value, we're going to build value, we're going to work collaboratively. That's fine, providing you have sufficient power or mutuality or interdependence with the other party to conduct a win-win negotiation. If they are significantly more powerful than you and have no interest in win-win, then you may well become compromised by simply going in and offering up conditional proposals. So, power is the first consideration. Who has the balance of power in a negotiation? Who needs who the most? Is that visible? Is it obvious? Or is there a high level of interdependency between us which will allow us to operate on the left-hand side of the clock face in a much more, if you like, collaborative context? What is the relationship? What is the individuals, the personalities, the history? Where are we at? Does that allow for sufficient levels of collaboration for us to move around and build total value on the left-hand side rather than in the harsher, more aggressive right-hand side of this clock face? What about the complexity? Are we talking about a two-issue deal here? Or are there dozens of different issues that are going to come into play, will be part of the total value makeup that need consideration? The more complex the deal, the more likelihood is that you'll be on the left-hand side of the clock face working through mutual interdependent agreements. But again, complexity is another measure of where you're likely to steer on the clock face here. The issue of time. Has one party got more timelines? Are we involved in a contract that's due to expire at a certain point in time? Is there transparency around time? How is that going to affect the pressures that are in play? Is it a one-off deal? Or is this about an ongoing relationship with a significant follow-through process? Are we empowered? Are we working with empowered negotiators who are able to be creative in exploring options, in adopting a what-if mentality? Or are we dealing with junior members of their team who simply have a goal to achieve and aren't empowered to think outside of those very narrow micro goals? Are we working with strategic thinkers, or are we dealing with transactional thinkers who are just simply worried about the day, today? Are they worried about winning, doing a deal, or are they worried about or concerned or interested in longevity, potential, opportunity, life beyond a simple one-off agreement? That'll make a difference to where you end up on the clock face. What about trading ability? Do they have the mindset to think about how What else could I bring into play here as part of overcoming a particular barrier that we have in play? Or are they, look, there is the agenda, there's our proposal, we'd like to know your thoughts on it, or you're involved in a tender process and it's very fixed and rigid and stiff and gives you no means. You're not dealing with people who are interested in reworking, regurgitating, playing with the flexibilities that are possible within total value agreements. That will make a difference where you're at in the clock face. A creative appetite. You want, are they going to engage in, this is about building something, or this is about who wins? And again, that whole mentality will affect whether you're right or left-hand side of the clock face. How dependent are we? Can they walk away? Or is there an interdependency here, which is going to be fundamental? Again, where we need to be up at 10 or 11 o'clock, we need to be working on the deal rather than against each other towards optimizing short-term value. And then is there information transparency? Can we see what there is to be seen, or are we hiding behind our computer screens, doing our research, doing our analysis, but not sharing sufficiently for there to be mutual exploration? So there's a lot of factors there that start to set a tone around the nature of the relationship and where we are on this clock face. Now, the clock face is simply a compass of saying there are many different ways of negotiating. There'll be reasons why you may finish up somewhere, but equally you may have a strategy to draw the other party into a particular position. For example, if you want a joint problem solving or a partnership, because you believe a partnership has more value to offer in the long term, and you have enough power to hold them now, is there enough creativity? Is there enough information transparency? Do we have the ability to trade and work and engineer? Do we have the time within which to do it? Because often value is sub-optimized because there simply isn't enough time and the agreement needs to come to a close, or some companies perceive that to be the case. So having built this and used this as a backdrop, as a compass to say, look, there's no right, there's no wrong, there's no good, there's no bad. There just is. It's just how negotiations unfold. But the more informed you are, the more you understand about what it is that's going to steer you in one direction or another, the more able you are to recognise what that will do to value, what that will do to possibilities, and what it will do to your whole mindset of engaging and sharing information and building trust, all which are fundamental to the left-hand side, or what's more commonly found in the business-to-business negotiation environment. So understanding there are different environments and different types of negotiations. Time will mean different things depending upon where you are on the clock face. So let me give you an example. Trust is another one, of course. Okay, let me give you another example. Here we go. The bidding process. For anyone here who's ever been involved in a bidding process, you'll understand that this is the harsh end of the clock face. There isn't much of a relationship going on here. You know, there isn't much of creativity. There's no scope for creativity. There's little scope for longevity unless there's a service contract that's been predefined that you've signed up to say we will fulfill this particular service contract. But it's driven by a number of factors. Pre-qualified entrance by a set date. Then it's coupled with 5 rounds, which you may engage in that round and counter bid, or come back with your counter bid, or it could be any number of rounds that's preset. In other words, the organisers of the bidding are effectively controlling the negotiation process. They have total control over when you can bid, the extent to which you need to bid, and whether or not you are the winners of that bidding round. They're set time limits. There's a cap there. If you're not back by 4 p.m. on given date with your counter bid, then you are out of the round. There's controlled visibility of others' behaviours. You don't even know often what the other parties have counter-bidded with, or indeed even if they have counter-bidded. So you are being totally controlled by the bidding process. So this is 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock on the clock face. In other words, time is being used against you to encourage this thing called competitive tension. Because the consequence of being outbid is what burns away in the minds of those who are empowered to commit to the next bid, i.e. the most senior people in the organisation. So as an example from the clock face here, at 1 o'clock you are being controlled by the process that you're engaged in. By the time you get around to the 9, 10, 11 o'clock environments where there is greater independency, greater mutual interest, It could even be a joint venture where you're mutually invested in each other's operation. At that point, time is something you can be much more open about and mutually agree, as opposed to one party imposing the process on another. So time is absolutely fundamental to what goes on. Now, there's also this thing called time under relativity and fairness. A lot of people have different perceptions of what fairness means. And typically, if somebody else gets the same as me, then that's probably fair. But if they're getting more than me, surely that can't be fair. This concept of what's fair. You know, there is no place for fairness in negotiation, by the way, but the word is often used of what is fair and reasonable under the circumstances. Anyway, so you've got this concept of relativity and fairness, and people seem to measure something's fair if I'm treated the same as others, if I'm in the same space as others, or if it's, you know, if it can be substantiated by the market, what the market has done. If I'm getting the same, then that's got to be fair, isn't it? Well, what is fair today may well be different tomorrow, or next month, or even indeed next year, because time changes relativity and it changes circumstances. In other words, what I believe to be fair today is fair because of everything that I can see today, what you presented to me. That seems to be fair and reasonable, if indeed there is such a thing in negotiation. That seems to be fair and reasonable. But what I'm suggesting here is the whole concept of fairness is up for challenge over time. As time progresses and circumstances evolve, you know, in other words, an agreement that is signed today based upon what we believe to be a fair deal for all concerned, in a year's time, when you come back to revisit that same deal, when the market circumstances have moved on and changed, when new competitors have come into play, when your cost base has suddenly changed, and you look at this deal and you think, my God, this can't be fair. It's not about fair, because the concept of fairness will change over time. So it's quite a poor measure of adopting any particular deal or going into any particular agreement, because what is fair today will not be fair tomorrow. Circumstances are continuously changing. I was involved in an agreement late back end of last year between a very large software company that sell data diagnostics. And they sell data diagnostics to the market, and they were in quite a lot of trouble. They had $100 million worth of debt with the bank, and business was not going particularly well for them. And they had sat down with the bank and discussed a number of options and put forward a proposal to the bank that they go and seek an investor, an outside investor, into their business in return for equity. So they were seeking $400 million worth of investment into their business from a big brother, uncle technology company, and had started engaging in conversations with this technology company. It would be a name that you'd know, but I can't share because it's been recorded today. Anyway, so there's this $400 million equity deal in progress, under discussion. Meanwhile, this same technology company called ICAL, I-C-A-L, a Californian business. And ICAL were also interested in buying into a service which was a technology platform facility, and the opportunity on the table was going to bring some real synergies, opportunities to their main data analysis offering. So this company called PAW were going to offer the platform, and the deal was on the table for $40 million. And they sent one of their senior directors out to engage in conversations with their team to see what sort of agreement, in principle, could be agreed with PAW, whilst at the same time they are engaged with this equity buy-in opportunity over here with this large technology company for $400 million. Well, the director returned from his negotiations with PAW and said, I've got an amazing deal on the table. They're prepared to do it for $25 million. I know it was $44 million. I've got it down to $25 million. Subject to us agreeing by the end of this month and signing contracts. That is the deal that's on the table. Now, this time, PAW were starting to leak conversations in the press about their discussions with PAW. because they wanted this large technology company over here to believe that there was something here. In other words, there was an option for PAW to buy into iCal. So this is all being used as a means of saying, look, we've got another option over here. The fact was, they were simply talking about a platform, a technology platform. The big technology company managed to get a hold on the financial status, due diligence had been going on for some time by now, of iCal, and recognised the trouble that they were in with the bank. In other words, they only had about 6 weeks left before the banks were going to close in on them. So it was pretty critical. And so the large technology company decided to string things out for a few more weeks. iCal didn't want to lose the deal. Don't lose the deal with PAW. We need that at 25 million. Director saying they're only going to hold it. It's the end of the month. They're only going to hold it at the end of the month. But we're being strung out by the large technology company over here, and we just need to keep it on hold. Look, I tell you, just go back and renegotiate. We've got to go beyond the end of the month. It doesn't matter if you go back to list price at 40 odd million. Just keep it on hold. We cannot afford to lose that. But meanwhile, we've got to see this 400 million deal through with the large technology business. Suddenly, out of the blue, news broke that this large technology company had just bought PAW. And suddenly, the PAW deal collapsed, the buying collapsed, and 3 weeks later, iCal were closed down, were no longer a business. And what they were engaged in doing, or what they were caught up in, was the different time frames that were, both PAW wanted a quick deal, but we had no idea they were talking with a large technology company. The large technology company knew that there were troubles there, just wanted to string it out to bring the price down for the same level of equity. But at the same time, iCal had no idea that the large technology company was also talking with PAW about a deal. And so whether it would have been appropriate to have done a deal for 25 million earlier and take the hit, although iCal would have struggled with the cash implications of that, but at least they would have been tied in when the large technology company came in to buy PAW. But it was a classic set of circumstances. It was unfolding through last October, November, December. When you were looking at it, you're thinking, my God, this is all, had the board of iCal responded differently, managed differently, maybe even had been more open with the large technology company around their circumstances, might there have been a deal to have been done, even had it been lower than 400 million, that may have actually saved the business, because the business now clearly no longer exists. So this time issue really does play a vital part. The timing of the decisions that you take, the information that you share, the way in which you navigate the landscape, hopefully, more often than not, in a proactive context than a reactive context, as had become the case with iCal last year. Let's take a look at time as a value, how time is employed as a value during negotiations. Time is money, they say, because it's the cost of people, the cost of employment, the cost of moving things, and the value of time is absolutely fundamental of understanding what is the cost of time. So, for example, if you look around the world today, there are massive economies that are coming into play. Machinery, motor cars are actually getting cheaper year on year because of things like robotics, things like where component parts are being made from. You look at what's happening in China today, with cost prices increasing because labour prices are increasing and certain manufacturing operations being moved to different parts of the world or different parts of Asia simply because of the cost of time, the cost of people. And the more you understand about what does time do to money, do to cost, do to every conceivable variable in negotiation, you start to appreciate that time has a fundamental influence around both cost and value. It is not something which is independent, it is something which lays over the top. So, for example, what have we got coming up here? Technology has created some real-time efficiencies. Communication. The time it takes to communicate, we all know now, whether it be on WhatsApp, Google, email, compared with 10, 15 years ago, is fundamentally different. And I'm not just talking about the communication of the negotiation process here. I'm talking about communication of relationships which are interdependent, that have contracts to deliver, where I need to understand where my product is right now, when it's arriving, when it will be in depot, when it will get managed through, how many of them there will be, and so on. The communication, the understanding of information is fundamental to value, that relationship. And communication is forever, be it by technology, being increased in speed, complexity, variety, and it creates efficiencies. And the extent to which we understand how those efficiencies come into play around the fundamental variables of negotiation are really important to the way in which we weigh up the value of a deal. When we look at the price or the value of a deal, it's fundamentally important to understand what is time doing to each of the variables. Data analysis. How critical is data analysis to any particular agreement in terms of performance, in terms of compliance, in terms of transparency? Do we understand the trends? Do we understand if we're going forward, backwards, up, down, getting better, getting worse? Can we see that? Have we got visibility around that? Is that part of the performance and the compliance issue of the negotiation agreement? And how much value does that bring to the agreement? Because without that data analysis, are we now in a more ambiguous, more difficult, challenging environment to measure, and therefore more trust required? Or do we have the transparency? How much value does data analysis provide a business with? Is it tangible or is it intangible? Is it around convenience factors or can it bring real efficiencies? Absolutely fundamental. Technology can bring that data analysis to the way in which contracts are realised. Reporting. How is it reported? How much access do we have? In this day and age when we can click on our mobile phone and see our bank account, how much we've spent in the last year on our credit cards, how much value does an organisation place on the fact that they have instant access to all forms of information? How much value can we bring to the table, introduce to the table, low-cost, high-value trade-offs simply by the familiarity and the opportunities that reporting provides? Measuring. How do I set about measuring this particular? There's a number of particular deals that I've done over the years with consumer brands. So the Procter & Gamble's, the Nestle's, the Kellogg's, the Coca-Colas of this world, many of them, and the ability to get a deal was clear. They had plenty of brand power, plenty of opportunity to build their markets within the primary grocers and grocery retailers, wholesalers. But what they often struggled to do was to get the retailers to perform the commitments that they had made, whether that be around having the right numbers of products, the right types of products in the right stores, in the right positions, being promoted in the right way. In other words, how do I measure compliance of all the things that I'm giving you investment against? I'm about to write a cheque out for £100 million because you are prepared to do this for me. How do we set about measuring that? Do you have the means? Do you have the infrastructure to measure this, or is this an obligation that's placed upon me, a cost that's obligated on me to measure you to ensure that you are fulfilling your side of the bargain? Because I'm about to place a lot of funds or a lot of investment into this particular element of the agreement. So being able to measure compliance and measure performance is fundamental. And again, technology is working at providing much of that for us. Inventory management is fundamental to a lot of manufacturing organisations, knowing exactly the whole, from the outset of raw materials right the way through to factory gate and on, is understanding exactly where our expenditure lies, where our investment lies, where raw material costs lies. The automation of administration, again, we can reduce your administration costs by X, Y or Z simply by providing you certain facilities, certain transparency, because the technology is there to do that now. And are we working and managing and building agreements around these possibilities? Or are we simply assuming the same variables as last year, the year before are in play, and it's those costs that we're having to build into our assumptions in the way in which we are exploring value in the context of a negotiation? So technology is providing other areas, security, risk, If you look at various ways in terms of the types of risk that we take on board, how can technology guard against that? Banking and cash management, how do we understand who has paid what, where our aged debtors are, whether we're behind or ahead, what that's going to cost, who's going to be responsible for that? And can we make that absolutely crystal clear rather than an argument between two finance departments around where a particular invoice has got to or why it hasn't been paid, as we might have seen in the past. So the more and more technology can support the way in which deals unfold, the way in which deals are lived, what we call follow-through, the execution of the life of that agreement. How do we ensure that we're not back here having to renegotiate in 9 months' time because we hadn't thought through how are we both going to mutually engage in managing through the execution of this contract, this agreement. And technology has so many different ways now where it can add value or reduce cost or provide transparency to the way in which deals are agreed. Now, if we take a look at some of the fundamental variables that you'll typically find in a negotiation, I've just taken a blanket number of variables here that don't relate to any specific deal, but the idea behind this is to look at each of these variables and say each of these variables that could feature within a negotiation will also be linked to a thing called time. Under what circumstances, to what end, when do they kick in, when do they finish? In other words, let's look at guarantees on the left-hand side here. He asks for how long is the guarantee? Is it for a year? Is it for 3 months? Is it a lifetime? How does it work? So once you link time to that guarantee, it has a totally different value associated with it. Service levels. Yeah, for how long is that service level in play? Is it the first level, second level, third level? After sales responses. Have we got 1 hour, 3 hours, 4 days? Is it 3 months? What will the response time be and how will that affect that particular variable? Yeah, around support materials. When will those support materials be available? Exactly when do they get released? How long will they be available for? Again, putting time-related parameters around that variable will affect what it is worth. Exclusivity, top right-hand side. For how long will we have exclusivity? So in other words, it's not just about agreeing exclusivity on a particular service or a particular product. It's the length of time for which you secure that particular characteristic feature of the agreement. That is what's critical, because there's a big difference between 1 month exclusivity and 1 year's exclusivity in terms of how much value you might place on that variable as part of trading that variable against another. Payment terms, for Christ's sake, everyone will know that's so blatantly obvious. Have we got 7 days payment terms, or have we got 90 days payment terms? Have we got 180 days payment terms? Very, very different meanings. Very different meanings. So when you start to latch time to each of these variables, they actually carry a different net value. So we need to, in every single case, we're thinking about the variable in play that we're going to be working with, the agenda that we're going to be talking about, the way in which we're going to be exploring possibilities, if indeed we are up on the right-hand side of the clock face, is about understanding what will time do to value. Indeed, just the sheer length of the contract. You know, is it a 1 year contract? Is it a 3 year contract? Is it a rolling contract? Does it have triggers in it? Is it performance related? At what point are we back around the table renegotiating this contract? What parts of this contract are renegotiable after certain periods of time? You know, if it's a lease contract, is it an annual review, rent review, as an example, or is it a 3 year rent review? Very different values associated with that one variable. So the point I'm trying to make here is whatever bunch of variables you may be involved in engineering, agreeing, trading off, you might see it as a low cost, high value. It's important that we understand what is time doing to the net element within our heads in terms of how we value that particular variable. But of course, there's another concept, which is what is time doing to the value of that variable to the other party? Because the way we value time is quite different to the way in which they will value time. A 1 year agreement to me may be worth more than a 3 year agreement to them, because of the situation that we're in, because of where we come from, because of our interdependency, because of how critical this deal is to me. So don't simply assume that what's going on in my head and my estimation, my measurement of time is consistent with the other parties. It's important to understand we're both in different places here. We both have different interests. We have a mutual interest about optimising value, building value, creating value, perhaps if we're both up on the left-hand side of the clock face. However, the implications of an early agreement, to me personally, may be fantastic because I measured monthly or quarterly. It's my quarter end. If I get that agreement in place by the end of the month, which is the end of my quarter, that is fundamentally critical. I'm prepared to make a couple more concessions just to get the agreement here at the end of this quarter. Meanwhile, it may have absolutely no consequences to the other party whatsoever. I'm placing myself under pressure, perhaps only if I allow them to know that, of course. But the fact is we're in different places around the necessity to get that agreement through. And the same will apply around the necessity to link each of these variables to a time-related zone. In other words, what does time do to the value and the total value of what's being agreed, what's being negotiated? Really important to remember that. I was involved in another deal quite recently down in Australia, in fact, with the Australian Catering Services Company based down in Brisbane, and they were involved in a tendering process. Well, essentially, they are bakers. They're bakers, more like a factory, a big factory. They bake pastries, breads, and so on and so forth. And they had gone into a tendering process on a contract to supply to a large catering company. And this large catering company were very prestigious. In fact, they even, from what I understand, serviced the likes of the Australian Prime Minister. The deal, they got involved in this tender process, and they got down to the final two. And at that point, the catering company went back to ACS and said, right, you're down to the final two. We want to bring you in and have what we call some post-tender negotiations and just work through some of the final details. And there they were sat around the table talking about some of the final details because they were neck and neck with another party on just about all of the other terms and conditions. And they suddenly introduced, because of course this particular item that they were about to introduce was not part of the tendering process, wasn't even asked about, a facility which was a technology facility which allowed each of their customers to have total online transparency via their telephone of the whole inventory and supply chain. In other words, if you place an order, you can change it within 30 seconds from your mobile phone. You can see where your order is at that very moment in time, both from the point where it's a piece of dough through to the point where it's just sat outside of your premises being delivered. In other words, so we have a 30-second response time for you to be able to manage your orders with us. And I remember this buyer for the catering service just screaming out, 30 seconds? That's amazing. How do you do that? And it was obvious, it was built in, they had built into their own infrastructure technology into an app, and they could give it to their customers, and their customers could see all they needed to see. Well, they won the contract on that one convenience factor alone, with everything else being equal, with that purely on the fact that this was going to bring the catering company peace of mind. It was going to give them convenience. The best the other company could do was we will respond within 1 hour by email if you need to change your order for any reason. The difference between a 1 hour response time on an email and I can see exactly where I'm at, and actually I can change it on my phone on an ongoing basis for a significant bakery contract, was the difference between winning a deal and not winning a deal. So that investment of providing their customers with convenience that in some way, shape or form they believe ultimately would provide them with some form of efficiencies was enough to win them the deal on the day. And again, it was something simple, something they hadn't even realised until they introduced it during the round-the-table conversations, the post-tender negotiations. But when they highlighted or identified with the response that it attracted, they realised, my God, this really does add value. It wins you business that would otherwise be difficult to win if you were simply measured on a bunch of other variables, like for like with your other competitors. So there are many, many examples out there now where technology is creating efficiencies linked with standard variables and that make a difference between winning and losing and concluding deals and agreements. Okay, we've got this thing called time and circumstance. Circumstances change with time. Supply and demand, another key factor in economics and certainly in negotiations, and cause and effect. Some things that a particular thing which happens has an indirect effect on another element of an agreement, a deal, a contract that's in play. And what we tend to find is an agreement gets made and there's a certain amount of value that gets calculated. So we've done the agreement and that's the value and that's fantastic. We'll sign the contract and we'll move forward. But the secondary consideration is risk. What risks does that contract come with over time, over the lifetime of the agreement, and what is the amount of value that's actually realised? In other words, how do I protect that agreement on day one? How do I future-proof that agreement on day one to ensure that it actually delivers me the value realised is the same as the value calculated on day one? In other words, what are all the clauses that are going to be challenged over time that may dilute the absolute value that we believe we had agreed to on day one? And it's time that will do that. You see, in many of the programs that we run around the world, one of the concepts we look at is how do you future-proof an agreement? How do you look at all the things that could go wrong, all of the compliance and performance challenges that over time will dilute the value of what you thought you agreed to on day one? Because if you're in a position on day one where you're making specific forms of investment on the assumption that said value will be realised over the duration of that contract, how do I protect that? And what are the variables, what are the terms and conditions that I need to introduce that protect my investment? And it's often overlooked because said circumstances arrive over time and we end up renegotiating around the table because nobody saw that set of circumstances appearing on the horizon. So time has an effect. So although you've got time and circumstance, there are circumstances that will change over time. You've got supply and demand changes that will change over time, cause and effect of things that are directly related to the contract itself that will change over time. So part of what we need to always think about when we go into agreement is how will time affect the value? What is the value to be realised? Could that be eroded over time? And how do we protect ourselves against that? How do we build that into the value agreement, the overall proposition of the agreement? So I'm now going to talk about how time affects proactivity. In other words, how do you take control of time over negotiation? I'm going to do it quite simplistic because I can spend 3 days talking about strategic negotiation, and we heard a little bit about processes earlier on. But this whole idea of being proactive, of controlling time as time unfolds. So, the sequencing of events to ensure you have the power to implement your strategy. How do I set about sequencing events? How do I stand back and look at a range of different events that can provide a stronger power base with which to negotiate from? Too often I get approached by organisations, or my organisation gets approached by organisations for help with a specific what we call distressed negotiation. It's a negotiation that isn't going very well, or has gone wrong, or what hasn't even started, but they're already on the back foot, and they've got a problem, and they need to resolve it. And actually, it's the worst possible time to get involved, because of course we're so far down the route that people have become entrenched, they've got positions on the table, and you are very reactive in nature. So it's a very weak position from which to start from. So the advice that we always provide our clients with is if you think you've got something coming up, talk to us 3 months before you're even about to engage in conversations. There is nothing like proactivity in being able to steer, shape, control and sequence events to remain in charge of your negotiation. So sequencing events is critical. It's about how we use time and momentum to ensure the appropriate level of competitive tension. In other words, if you're in a negotiation, you can bring other players, other options, you know, the notion of a BATNA. If you've got no BATNA, you're in a pretty weak position. If you've got no options, nowhere to go, you're in a weak position. How do we build some options, build some alternatives, you create some competitive tension as part of momentum, and employing that as such to keep the balance of power in check. It's fundamental to your strategic thinking before the process even starts. So proactive control of time allows you to engage in these types of activities. Anticipating those circumstances from which you will deter from your strategic aim. So what are the circumstances that will deter you from your aim? So let me tell you a bit about a story around this. I think I've got a slide here on a story. Strategic plan time. So we've always got time scales. So let's map out the weeks, the months, the years, however we believe. And let's look at the phases that we need to work through. The first phase, the second phase, the third phase, the fourth phase of discussions. What would each of those phases be made up of? and which type of strategy will we adopt? We have the Gap Partnership with 9 different negotiation strategies as a starting point, and each one has 9 different contingencies that are available to you, because the likelihood is something will happen that you're not expecting. In fact, we actually design most strategies in such a way that it's unlikely they're going to work. We're going to go down this path, and the likelihood is it ain't going to work. Well, why won't it work? Well, let's think of all the things that could go wrong, all the things that all the triggers that are going to make us say, actually, we saw that coming, we understand that situation, let's move to our first contingency. In other words, we're still in control. We thought it might happen, but it's okay. If it doesn't happen, that's great. We carry on with strategy 1, with plan A, as we would call it. But if there are major problems that prevent us from exercising plan A, in other words, we've gone into forceful, we've been too assertive, we've been too aggressive perhaps in our positioning, how are we going to move from that position? So really important to understand the need for understanding where are we going to be by week here, -5, -4, and at -4 do we continue or do we move down to a second or a first contingency? In other words, plan A is built to succeed, and we don't need plan B and we won't need plan C. But if plan A doesn't work, we may need to drop down to plan B. And if plan B doesn't work, we need plan C. And sometimes we have strategies that have about 7 different contingencies, but all of the time we saw it coming and we are still in control. We knew that would happen, that's okay, we're going to move. In other words, we eliminate the necessity to become reactive, because our response is already pre-planned. We know where we're going to move to because we suspected that would be the case. And that's only if we're challenged to the point where plan A, in the first instance, is just unmaintainable, unsustainable. So it's about understanding the different approaches. Now here, a particular negotiation that I was involved in last year, this was between a soft drinks, let's call them a soft drinks company, and a grocery retailer. And the soft drinks company was introducing a price increase across the board to everyone. Everyone's getting a price increase, and we're going to substantiate it on the basis of a weakened foreign exchange. So that foreign exchange had a cost price increase. The cost of bringing goods in, raw materials in, was increasing. Therefore, we're going out with a strategy to increase our prices. We have a secondary plan, and that is also to introduce some new innovative ideas, some new innovative products that we need to try and get our customers to accept, to buy into, and to ultimately to store. So we're going to increase prices and we want them to take more products. That's going to be quite challenging. Anyway, let's go out and we're going to have meetings with all 7. There are 7 primary grocery retailers this is principally in the UK. So we're going to go out and we're going to have meetings with them all, and we're going to send a letter after those meetings, so a top-to-top meeting between the senior commercial directors. We're going to send a letter out confirming the price increase, and then we're going to go through to what is called meeting 1. We're going to sit down and have a proper negotiation. Now, we need to sequence events here, and there's a real risk. And that risk is if we go out and have the same conversation with all 7 grocers. Of course, they all have different market share, so they're all different levels of power in terms of what they mean to us and what we mean to them. And so what we need to do is create some power through sequencing here. Now we've got 2 options. We can create power from the bottom up by getting an agreement with the smaller players, with the 4 smaller players who only make up 40% of the total market, and use that momentum to place pressure on the larger players. Or we can start at the top end. That's to say, to go to the biggest player in the market. That player has a 40% market share, massive market share, 40% market share. Get them to agree, and then use that pressure, in the fact the number 1 player in the market has already agreed, it's already in place, and place that pressure on the others subsequently. They also have what's called an investment pot, an amount of money to invest to help facilitate the introduction of these new innovative products. So they decided that first meeting was only going to be with the number 1 player in the market. They went in, they held conversations. They deployed or offered up the investment pot that they had available. We need you to take this particular new range of products. We're putting the prices up, by a factor of 3%, but we're prepared to offset that with some investment for you. Now, this is the issue. If you don't agree, by the end of week 4, we're going to be offering that investment pot to player number 2 and player number 3. But we're offering it to you first. Do you want it? If you want it, this is the agreement. You agree to what we have on the table today, and we put out a joint press comment and story saying that you have accepted our terms and are in bed with us, and we're going to use that PR to positive effect through the market. So what happened? By the end of week 4, they had a second meeting, and they got agreement by the end of week 4 with the number 1 player in the market. Of course, no one else knew what had been invested to get that agreement. But they got the agreement, they got the PR issue out there, and then they embarked upon the second phase. With that momentum behind them, they then started talking with the PR behind them, meeting number 1 with players number 2 and 3. Now, if they got players number 2 and 3, by this point, they'd have had 60% of the market in the bag already agreed. The rest will just tumble over like Dominoes would. It'll be pretty straightforward. They went in 2 and 3, said, look, number 1 has already agreed with us. You've seen it in the press. We're in the bag. Are you going to be the only stores in the market without these new innovations in play? Or are you going to slip behind? Is your growth going to reduce? Or do you want to accept the price increase and we will allow you to have the new innovations come through as well? Of course, they needed them to stock the innovation. Well, by meeting 2 and an agreement and a further announcement by the end of week 6, that agreement was in place. They had 60% of the market. The rest was simply a letter, 4 meetings. They imposed it on the others and they agreed it. And by that point in time, they had the whole market. In other words, if they'd gone out and talked with all 7 and held 7 conversations and negotiations all running in parallel with each other, they would have had no momentum, no power. They would not have sequenced. They would not have understood how they were going to utilise the momentum in the market. They did that to positive effect. By the end of week 9, they had agreement across the board, and the others, they simply used what we call an impose strategy and provided them with very, very, very little by way of option and imposed that negotiation strategy. At the GAP Partnership, we also have our broad range of strategic tools that we deploy. I'm just mentioning the fact that there's a lot of process tools around there that help align thinking across the different stakeholders that exist in any particular organisation. The number 1 factor of any strategic negotiation over time is the alignment of the stakeholders. If you've got misalignment across your teams, you've got problems. You've got big problems around communication, around transparency, around sequencing, around understanding what time will mean and what proactive operation will mean to any given negotiation. Absolutely critical. I'm not going to go through them today, there's no time, but just to say there's a lot of thinking that goes into understanding, mapping, sharing, aligning and identifying the appropriate strategy for any particular negotiation that we typically work with. There's a lot of turbulence. How are we doing on time, by the way? That's a good question, isn't it? I've got 20 minutes. Okay, let me rattle through this one on turbulence. Process and phases I've just touched on. Sequencing events over time can attract turbulence and need control. The amount of power you've got determines the number of options that you've got available to you and how you set about executing your negotiation strategy or the tactics that you have within negotiation. Potential problem issues and problem solving, again, will create turbulence in terms of can delay, can slow down, can stall the progress of negotiations. And again, the whole need to conduct potential problem analysis as part of a strategic planning process is fundamental to mapping out, shaping and controlling the nature of your negotiations. Momentum, confidence and ego. You've got to remember, we negotiate with people. Not with companies, not with organisations, with human beings. And human beings, believe you me, they have egos. And those egos need managing. And those egos will be affected by time and by fairness and by consequence and by personal consequence of what it means to them in that particular deal. And what you've got to try and promote with them, within their heads, from a psychological perspective, is that we have momentum here and that's worth nurturing. It's worth cherishing. Let's keep on building. Let's keep on progressing. Let's keep summarising to understand where the common ground is and how we're working together on here and where the next step is and why we should be both moving towards that next step. That momentum is fundamental to helping the other party or other parties through the agreements that you're involved in. Deadlines and the implications to highlight, to present what those implications might be. Again, if you're walking towards a cliff edge and walking over that cliff edge is a no-no, then how do you understand where that is? How do you understand the extent to which deadlines are real, whether they are false deadlines, and what they will do to the human beings that are involved in that negotiation? The consequences of no deal or external change of dynamics. What happens if the market changes? What if our assumptions around the finances, around financing, around foreign exchange, around any assumptions that have been taken, what if they change even during the deal discussions themselves? How might that affect the negotiation? How much have we considered that turbulence that could come to the table? What about event-driven triggers? In the event that X happens, we will do Y. In the event that Y happens, we will do X. In other words, different events over time that attract different triggers. To what extent have we factored that into our conversations and ultimately the deal? What are the clauses? Earlier on, I talked about conditions, deal engineering, and decision making. What are the clauses that are going to protect and future-proof our deal, future-proof our agreement? Because there's one thing, a bit like the sea, that will continue to come in each day with the tides. It will erode and erode and erode if you're not careful. So we've got to protect it. We've got to understand what are the conditions around the deal. What are the risks? And what are the other pressures that are drive? The options, contingency planning, circumstances of change, and of course dependencies. Is there a continuum of dependencies, or might those same dependencies of today change over time simply because there are more players around, more possibilities and others for our business partners to work with? In other words, we're operating in an incredibly dynamic environment, ever-changing, driven by time. Tomorrow will come, whatever, for us all. Nobody can stop that. No man can stop time. And when we start to recognise that, and we recognise what it does to us, what it does to our agreements, what it does to our deals, why it should serve to inform our proactivity around the way in which we set out our plans and the way in which we think about the agreements and the relationships that we're involved in, it is time that will present us with our biggest challenge, which is why I say it's one of the biggest influences of negotiation. It affects every aspect in every conceivable possible way that I come across. So at this point, I recognise we're down to about 15 minutes, or maybe even 10 minutes. I'm open to taking any questions that you may have on any aspect of negotiation. It doesn't need just to be about these three. It is my life, my love, my joy, my passion. As anyone who knows me will know. It's what I live around the world in every conceivable culture, understanding and sharing and supporting my team of negotiation practitioners in how they help in real life, and we live in the real world negotiations. So open to you all. Not all at once, of course.
Thanks very much. This is very interesting. You talked about strategies and contingencies for them. And I was trying to connect that in my mind. Is it right for me to think of those strategies as possible roadmaps and ways to go and different routes and alternatives? Could you explain a little bit? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, they are. Essentially, they kick off with as being roadmaps. The approach that you can take in any particular strategy is determined by the amount of power you have in the relationship. One of the tools that we use in negotiation is a tool which allows us to, in groups, that is to say all the stakeholders, we get round the table and we evaluate through a set of determined questions, both real and perception of power across a whole range of different dynamics. And it's a piece of software that we've developed. And essentially, it gives you a score, your score and their score at the bottom once you've completed this exercise. And it's about a 2-3 hour exercise, depending on how much dialogue takes place around the rights, wrongs, pros, cons. But the amount of power that you have informs the type of strategy that you can afford to adopt. In other words, if you have very little power, you have no way of exercising an assertion strategy. You cannot force, you cannot impose, you cannot challenge, you cannot threaten if you have no power. So understanding where does the balance of power sit from a very, very objective standpoint. And when we understand that, we've got options. And at one extreme, you've got exit, the relationship, that's your starting position, maybe not what you're intending to do. At the other extreme, you've got capitulate, and there's nothing wrong with capitulate if you do it in the right way. If they have 100 points and you've got 0 points, you've got no power, what do? You can still negotiate effectively, and there is a process for doing that under what we call capitulate. It is the extreme end, I accept, but it has to be down there. And of course, there are 7 other strategies between those 9 as a starting point. And each of those strategy definitions is essentially a roadmap. That is the preferred. That's our plan A. We need to work out the phasing. We need to work out the communication. We need to work out the triggers, the potential problem analysis. But that's our plan A. And that puts us, let's say hypothetically, we're going down what's called a grow. We're growing value. We're engaging. We're going to communicate with them. We're going to talk about them. We're going to build value. We're going down a grow path. However, if they decide to exercise certain levels of power, in other words, if they reject, if they deny access, if they start deploying tactics which aren't consistent with a grow strategy, by, let's say, week 3, what that will do is that will trigger for us, we need to move. Now, can we become more assertive, or do we need to become more passive in the way in which we're approaching this negotiation? And we need to agree that today, not in 3 or 4 weeks' time, today we're going to agree, if they start to deploy these tactics, this is how we will move. And that trigger will take us to another roadmap, process path. In other words, this is about the art of proactivity, staying in control regardless of what happens during the context of the dynamics of this negotiation. Now, so we try as best as we can proactively to map out the communications, and of course, right down at the micro end, you've got all the variables and the tactics that need to be designed and built as will be introduced at each stage of this process. But the process gives us a critical path. The most important part of that process is it gives us alignment across the stakeholders. We all know why we're doing what we're doing for the next 3 weeks. Nobody's going to start questioning it in week 2. Nobody's going to start knee-jerking or running off or capitulating in week 2. Because we've said, until week 3, we hold steady. And we know what that is designed to achieve. And indeed, if we get a positive response, then we move on with plan A, through into week 4, week 5, week 6, through to wherever we've defined the finishing point of this negotiation. How are we going to bring it together? How are we going to bring it to shape? How are we going to mutually agree with them what might be an appropriate set of timelines that we can work by, without, of course, exposing the implications to ourselves. So yes, in answer to your question, it is essentially a roadmap that you build and create. You don't adopt someone else's. This is simply a roadmap that you have to engineer. You have to build. You have to build from an understanding of the specifics around the business dynamics that you're engaged in.
On the 4.5 seconds example, this person gave up $1 million in 4.5 seconds. I was thinking, what if he took 5 minutes instead of 4.5 seconds? Wasn't he giving the wrong idea that he was winning a lot of money so he could spare $1 million? Could they have asked for $2 million instead?
Absolutely. And the irony of that particular illustration was there were no obvious implications of taking more time. It was the psychological fear of losing the opportunity that was placed before them. You're quite right, you're quite right. There is, things which are difficult to attain carry a greater value. To have said, I need to come back to you, I need to escalate this, I need to consult with, would have been highly appropriate, given the fact that even if he then chose to make the concession, at least it would have felt as though it had been thought through, and it was a difficult give. Generosity engenders greed. Had he agreed to 9 million, suddenly the other chap turns around and says, well, actually, 8 will get you a 2-year agreement. So we need to be very careful about how those concessions are made. So that seriously was not a best practice piece of behaviour. In fact, we run thousands of negotiation workshops around the world. And these are the experiential programs with video analysis, high-pressure case studies, and most of my consultants spend a lot of their lives analysing behaviour through what are fairly short periods of time, 1 hour, 20 minutes, 5 minutes even. And what we find quite incredible is that where there is a consequence in play, in the final few moments before a negotiation concludes, where there are mutual consequences in play, what type of behaviour suddenly comes to play? That is to say, the realisation that in the next 30 seconds there's going to be a deadlock and I stand to lose this deal. And suddenly the rational behaviour goes out of the window. Yeah, it's like anything that's better than the consequences that are there, I'm going to agree to one way or another. And suddenly the trading over the final 30 seconds is two-fo, let's get it. And they nail a deal. And it's amazing what the consequence of time and deadlock does to behaviour. Even in the real world deals, the deals I've been involved in that have affected me personally, with banks and with private equity firms. And you're sat there and the consequences of no deal to your entire organisation would be disastrous. And the pressure that places you under to be responsive, to be responsible, and to try and find a way. But ultimately, in the back of your mind, if you allow those consequences to affect your mindset, your attitude, you're at risk of making some crazy decisions. Which is why when I started this presentation, I talked a little bit about nerve. Negotiation is about the ability to exercise self-awareness, about understanding yourself and what negotiation will do to you. Doing that which is appropriate, not what time will do to you under the circumstances. Standing back and recognising no matter what it makes you feel, no matter what it's doing to you, to continue to do the appropriate thing. That's a lot easier said than done, but you need to exercise that ability to remain objective right until the end, but without seeing it as being a battle of egos and doing crazy things and deadlocking where, again, sometimes a deal is better than no deal at all.
Hello, Steve.
Hi.
My name is Sergio. I'm a current student at this university. I want you to tell me 3 keywords that you have learned in your life. Where is the factor of success, learning, and negotiation?
Oh, in 3 words.
No. Please, 1 word per each factor.
Okay, 3 words. 1 would be, I've just mentioned the word, nerve. Do you want me to explain it or just rattle off 3 words?
For example?
Okay. For me, nerve in business, in terms of your ability to remain conscious of your behaviour, of your actions, of your thoughts, at times when there are very real pressures and consequences in play, I think is fundamental to you maintaining the right judgment, of consistency in particular, but also exercising defendable actions because they are considered. And it's the nerve that allows you to do that, both inside negotiation and in business. So I think that's certainly a key characteristic that has worked for me. So you have to repeat that question. There's a lot of questions there. So the other categories?
Through my degree, I have understand that the key factor for learning is I don't know if in English is correct to say, curiousness?
Curiosity?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Curiosity to learn.
For me, but
Yeah.
I'm asking you,
Yep.
what do you think?
Well,
is the factor?
you know, negotiation is about working with other people, understanding other people, seeking information. Information is power, asking questions. And if you have a curious nature, you are much more likely to ask relevant questions, to engage in relevant conversation, to understand the interests, the priorities, the values of the other party. So certainly in negotiation, it's again, in my book, the negotiation book, I cover off 10 negotiation traits, of which curiosity is one and nerve is one. Equally in business, if you're looking which way forward, how, what are the implications, that curiosity around what could be, under what circumstances, why would people follow me into a particular market? Why would a particular client want to work with me? And the ability to learn not just about negotiation continuously, but learn about business, learn about opportunity, is driven by a curiosity to want to know more. To my wife's dismay, my Sunday mornings are spent sitting, reading and writing about negotiation because I have a passion for trying to determine and simplify what it is, because it can be awfully complex and we can dress it up in all sorts of ways. But my curiosity is how can I create a picture that says many, many things that helps everyone who's involved in negotiation capture the possibility, the art of possible, what it can do for you. The other word, if there were another word, would be creativity. The ability to be creative, the ability to engineer, to play with possibility, to think about what if, to remove the word no, to find ways of working with other people's egos and looking at the total value rather than the price. If you can maintain that creativity in the way in which you look at deals, you look at possibilities, believe me, you will get many more deals and much better deals than those if you go into combat each time. The same in business. You know, for me, if I'm going to do something in business, I will do it, but I will find a way of doing it, and the way that I ultimately end up doing it may not have been the way that I thought I was going to do it on the first day. You've got to navigate and find ways, and you've got to problem solve, and you've got to work with these things called human beings, and they may not want to do it the way you want to do it, so you've got to get creative around how you meet their needs while serving your own strategic objectives. And it's the same in negotiation. If you want to get the other party to a place that's challenging for them, creativity may be the solution in terms of how you repackage. And the more of that you have naturally, that you're thinking always about how there are different ways of cutting this, different ways of moving this, different variables you can pull in, push out, move around, and re-engineer, will provide opportunities that might not otherwise be there before. You see, it's not about you, it's about them. And negotiation doesn't take place in your head, it takes place in their head. And that's where you've got to be. You've got to be inside their head. If you're inside your own head, you're in a very dangerous place in negotiation. So your whole world is about what's going on in their mind. Hence curiosity, hence creativity, and hence the nerve, just to hold steady and think and wait and exercise patience, and if necessarily, take the time.
You miss one.
Thank you.
No. The last one. I mean, you miss one keyword.
One. Did I?
Yes, you do. At this time of your life,
Yeah.
what drives you to the success? What do you think that is the key factor for success? For example, yesterday I have I'm speaking with an entrepreneur who said, I changed my life when he sold his first entrepreneurship and he started to involve with NGOs and no-profit organizations because he thought that seeing a social and environment impact makes him more happy and thinks that he is more successful when he sees people with lights. Well, that was the main point of the speech. But I am asking you, what do you think is the key factor of success?
Okay, two answers to that. The first one is that, as you know, I mentioned, we run a lot of workshops. Our job is to help people with their careers to optimize opportunity. That is to say, many are general managers, buyers, account managers, salesmen who are aspirational. They have ambition. They have a desire to perform, to improve, to be the best they can be. Our job is to help them be the best they can be. So, and that is around the world in every culture. So our job is to help people to realise their dreams, their careers, their aspirations, to the best of our ability. We, as I said, we work with 500-600 organisations to that end. Personally, I have a commitment to 200 families, people who have vested their careers, their trust, their belief in what we are trying to achieve at the Gap Partnership, which is to be the best negotiation consultancy in the world, and that requires for you to get a lot of things right. So, Mike, today I'm CEO of the business, and my job is to take 200 people, and this time next year it will be 250, and the year after it will be 300 people, to a place whereby we can continue to identify and simplify best practice in negotiation and share that around the world, because there's a lot of value that is missed, that is sub-optimized, and there's a lot of value out there around the world that can be built. In other words, the thing I love about negotiation is I can take 3 and 3 and make it equal 8. I can create something from nothing. It's almost magical in its sense, if you can get people to adopt a certain mind space. So we can make the world a richer place, and we can help people to realise their ambitions. And if I can help 200 people become as passionate and involved around negotiation, around how they can help both our organisations, our companies, our clients, but the world be a richer place for it, then I can think of a lot worse things to do with my life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. How are we doing, Maria? Mike? Thank you.
I'm sorry, but we're running a little bit on time, a little bit late, so we thank you for your participation, and we'll ask you to meet us again at 2:30. 2:30. Thank you very much.